Senator Rice.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you. Good evening. I want to start with the Australian Climate Service announcement in the budget, which there was a joint media release that was welcomed by CSIRO along with the Bureau and the ABS. Was there extra funding received for CSIRO as part of the Australian Climate Service announcement?
It's shared funding, Senator, between the four partners, but we would expect it would lead to additional funding for CSIRO.
You'd expect it would lead to. Is there any extra funding that is committed at this stage?
So, Senator, at this point in time, we're working through the final, ACS starts on the 1st of July this year, and we've done a lot of pre-planning work as the four partners, and then we've got to do a final work through with the stakeholders, which is Emergency Management Australia and the National Resilience Agency, just to firm up the program, and at that point in time, we'll be able to contract to it. So we're just putting in place the agreements at this point in time. So I would expect over the next 2 months we'll have all of that worked out, but CSIRO will get additional dollars, yes.
Okay.
So that's a given, just the quantum, we just need to work through that.
Right. So, I mean, there's extra funding that was in the budget, so but there was nothing specifically allocated to CSIRO in the budget.
It was allocated to the activity itself, and the four partners are just working through the planning, and it comes down to what's required by the end users and what's the right contribution from each of the four partners. But I think we expect to be substantive funding over the 4-year period.
I mean, it's $209 million over the 4-year period. You know, if you've got a rough, based on your negotiations so far, the rough estimate of extra funding that CSIRO will get out of that then?
So as a range, somewhere between $40 and $60 million over the 4 years we'd expect to see for the work that we'd contribute.
Okay. Thank you. And what contributions, so what's the involvement of CSIRO by business unit to the ACS?
So it's the two primary business units involved is our Oceans and Atmosphere business unit through the climate work that gets done there, and the Land and Water business unit where there's a lot of work around resilience and I guess the systems risk reduction analysis that goes in with it and the vulnerability analyses and things like that. So those are the two primary ones, but it also will draw on Data 61 and possibly some of our energy resources as well. Yeah. Given that it's a federation of a lot of data and activity coming into one space, so it's quite large. So you would expect the bulk of that extra funding, that $40 to $60 million, would go to Oceans and Atmosphere and Land and Water? I think they would collect the lion's share of that, yes.
Okay. And when did you say that you're going to? Do you think that the consortium's going to be in a position to make an announcement as how much extra you're going to get?
So we're putting in place the collaboration agreement, which is the head agreement at this point in time. So we hope to have that in place later this month, and then the sub-agreements on particular programs of work will happen in the coming weeks after that. There is already some work which is just happening on a get-started basis, but I would expect sometime around July, August, we would have a clear view as to what the first tranche of funding is and how that will be executed on.
Right, and would you be looking, presumably with that level of increasing quantum in funding, you'd be looking at extra staff being employed, extra scientists being employed?
At this point in time, haven't really looked at specifically how we resource it. There's some resources that we would want to redeploy into the space because we think this is a good application domain.
But that redeploying wouldn't then... what I want to go to is the increase overall. I mean, if you're looking at an extra $40 to $60 million, you might be redeploying some staff into the ACS.
As a general rule, we try to partner where we can. So you may remember with the National Climate Centre, we partnered with a number of universities, UTAS, UNSW. The reason we do that is, we want to work with the smartest people in the country, and they're not all in CSIRO, much as I wish they were. But also it gives us a bit of a buffer because, as we know, as the Senator asked earlier, our revenue goes up and down.
Thanks, Dr. Marshall. But what I want to go to is the extra resources. Is there an expectation that we will be able to be employing extra climate scientists in particular, or environmental scientists through the Senator, ACS extra funding?
We don't know. We need to work through. Better have a plan rather than speculate. Yeah.
But fair to say...
Well, where's the money going to go if you've got $40 to $60 million and you're not employing new staff?
Senator, it's premature. Let us at least resolve the plan. We're happy to talk about it once we have a plan, but until we have a plan, what we tell you is
But
just
surely if you
hypothetical.
expect, if
Senator Rice, that's a perfectly reasonable response.
as Dr Mayfield is expecting to have an extra $40 to $60 million coming into the organisation, surely you would have an expectation then that, or you haven't. You think that that might come into the organisation and then go out and employ people in other
Senator
organisations?
Rice,
It will be
the
a
officials
mixture
have answered the
of
question.
what we do internally versus what we do with partners, as Dr Marshall said. And until we've done the final project planning and activity, it's hard to make a hard call on it. But it's a good situation